Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something that hits close to home for, well, everyone really. We're talking about how universities, those big institutions, are actually reshaping the cities they're in.
It's wild how these places, often seen as these isolated ivory towers,
Yeah.
actually have a huge impact on the cities around them.
Yeah, for sure. It goes way beyond just classes and degrees, right? You sent over some research about anchor institutions. What's that all about? And why should we even care?
Okay, so think about it this way. You've got a big company. Now they can pack up and leave if the business situation changes, right? But universities, medical centers, they're stuck. In a good way, usually. They own buildings, they employ tons of locals, and their whole purpose is tied to the community. That's what makes them anchor institutions.
Okay, so they're kind of stuck. But that's good because it means they're invested in the community, right?
Exactly. Their success depends on the neighborhood thriving, high crime, bad schools. That hurts the university just like it hurts anyone else. Which makes sense why we're seeing more and more universities getting involved in improving their communities. The report also mentioned that a lot of these schools are struggling financially, though, right? MOOCs, research funding being cut, that's got to be tough.
Absolutely. It's a time of big change for universities, but instead of making them retreat, it's actually pushing them to do even more in their communities.
Okay, let's get into some real examples. The report starts with the University of Pennsylvania, and, well, their story in West Philadelphia is something else.
It is. So back in the 90s, West Philly was dealing with a lot crime, blight, and this feeling that the university was totally disconnected from everything going on. Sadly, it got to the point where students were dying near campus, and Penn was forced to face the issue.
Wow, that's intense. What did they do?
They went big. They started something called the West Philadelphia Initiatives, WPI for short. It had five main parts, tackling things like safety, housing, building up businesses, making sure everyone benefits economically, and education too.
So it wasn't just a little fix, it was the whole package.
Exactly. For safety, they got more campus police, sure, but they also teamed up with others to create the University City District. They did things like improve lighting and make the streets cleaner, all to make the area safer.
So it's not just reacting after something bad happens, it's about preventing it too. What about housing? How did they handle that?
They gave people who worked at the university reasons to move into the neighborhood, figuring if more people had a stake in the area, things would get better. They even bought rundown houses, fixed them up, and sold some, rented some.
Wow, so they were putting their money where their mouth was, literally becoming residents. Did it work?
The numbers say yes. From 1990 to 2010, crime in University City was cut in half. Poverty went down, and they had this huge boom in economic activity. Like the amount of retail space grew by almost 40%.
Okay, that's a win, right? But I'm guessing it wasn't all perfect, was it?
This is where it gets interesting. All these improvements actually led to what the report calls petrification.
Petrification. Okay, that doesn't sound good. What does it mean?
Basically, as the neighborhood got safer and nicer, the cost of living went way up. Great for some people, but not so great for the people who already lived there and couldn't afford it anymore.
It's the classic gentrification issue. How do you make a community better without forcing the people who made it unique out?
Exactly. It caused a lot of debate about who really benefits from these changes and how to make them fair for everyone.
So what did Penn do? Did they just shrug and say, oh, well?
Not really, no. They made a big promise. They said that as part of this whole WPI thing, they wouldn't expand any further west into the neighborhood.
Whoa, that's a big deal. That must have taken some serious talking and rebuilding of trust.
It definitely did. It showed they were serious about being good neighbors, not just a powerful institution taking whatever they wanted.
Okay, but universities need space, right? If they couldn't go west, what'd they go?
They got their hands on some really valuable land along the Schuylkill River. First, they bought a 24-acre piece from the post office. Some of that became Penn Park, which is this huge athletic center that's open to the public.
So, green space, promoting healthy living. I like it.
Then they got a 23-acre plot where DuPont used to have research labs. This one's called the South Bank site, and the plan is to make it this cutting-edge innovation district.
Innovation district sounds impressive. What's that, though?
Basically, imagine a mini Silicon Valley, but Philly style. They want researchers, entrepreneurs, businesses all working together in the same space. Labs, startups, all that.
So it's not just a campus, it's a whole system for creating new stuff.
Right. And it fits into a bigger plan for the whole city to revitalize the area along the lower Schuylkill River.
Seems like they learned a lot from what happened in West Philadelphia. Okay, let's move on to another big name, Harvard University. They're running out of room in Cambridge, so they've got their eyes on Alston, right across the Charles River.
And their story really shows how even when you've got good intentions, things can get complicated when you're talking about a powerful institution expanding into a community that doesn't want to be steamrolled.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Harvard's first plan, back in 2007, was ambitious. We're talking a huge new science center, housing for like who knows how many people, cultural stuff. They were thinking big, like a 50-year plan.
Wow, that's a lot of change all at once.
Yeah,
How'd the people in Austin feel about that?
it was mixed. Some people, they saw it as a good thing, a chance to make the area better. But then others, they worried about Harvard taking over, especially with housing costs going up and all that.
Yeah, like that petrification thing we talked about in West Philly. Did Harvard change things up based on that feedback?
They did, but not right away. Remember that big economic crash in 2008? Well, it forced Harvard to put the brakes on Ulster, and that made people even more anxious.
I bet. Talking about plans is one thing. Having a half-finished project just sitting there, that's got to be unsettling. Exactly. They'd already poured the foundation for this gigantic science center, and it just sat empty for years, became this symbol of like broken promises and not knowing what was going to happen.
Oof, not a good look. How'd they fix it? Did they just go back to the old plans and the economy got better?
They realized they needed a do-over,
Mm-hmm.
fresh start. They put together this group, the Alston Work Team, with folks from the university and people from the community to rethink everything.
So they finally decided to actually work with the community instead of just telling them what was happening.
Hmm.
Nice. What came out of all that?
A whole new approach.
Yeah.
Instead of this huge, decades-long plan, they went for smaller projects, one step at a time. And they focused on partnership, making sure the community was involved every step of the way.
Less about Harvard being the boss, more about working together with Alston.
Exactly. One of the first things they did was with this apartment complex called Charles View. The old plan, they were going to tear it down. But instead of just kicking everyone out, Harvard worked with the owner to move those residents into brand new affordable apartments nearby.
That's great. They got better housing and got to stay in their neighborhood. Did they keep doing stuff like that?
They did. They started building this mixed-use development called the Residential and Retail Commons. It'll have regular apartments, but also stores and stuff on the ground floor, to make it lively and walkable. And they're finally building that science complex for real this time.
The one with the foundation that sat there forever? What's different now?
They made it a little smaller and decided to put most of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences there. It'll still be a big hub for research and all that, but it fits better with what the community wanted.
Okay, so more working together, smaller steps. What about those concerns about people being priced out? Did Harvard do anything about that?
They did. They signed this agreement, a community benefits agreement, for $38 million. This money goes towards a bunch of stuff: education, the arts, public health, job training, even green spaces.
$38 million. That's not messing around. It seems like they're serious about being a good neighbor.
It's a good start for sure. Now, let's jump over to the University of Chicago. They got really hands-on, revitalizing this whole shopping area right next to campus, 53rd Street.
This one's different, isn't it? It's not about the university needing more space. It's about them helping the area around them economically.
Exactly. So 53rd Street, it had been kind of run down for ages, but a lot of potential. The university decided to jump right in with this strategy they called anchoring the corridor.
Anchoring. Like a ship.
Kinda. They decided to build two big projects, their anchors, on each end of the street. The idea was that they would get other people to invest in between.
So they're creating these two centers of activity and hoping it spreads out. What were these anchors, though?
On one side, they built Harper Court. It's this mixed-use development with stores, offices, a parking garage, even a Hyatt Place hotel. They wanted to make it a place where people actually wanted to be, not just students and staff.
A whole hotel. That's a big deal, especially for an area that hasn't had a new one in forever. What about the stores? Any interesting ones?
They tried to get a good mix. You got your Starbucks and stuff, but they also brought in a bunch of local places. They were doing well and wanted to grow. They wanted it to be a fun, interesting place for everyone, not just the same old chains.
So one end is anchored by this busy mixed-use thing. What about the other end?
That's where they're building this new apartment complex called View 53. Apartments on top, more retail space down below.
More people living there, more people walking around. Makes sense. Anything else besides those two big projects?
Oh, yeah. They fixed up this old movie theater, turned it into a modern one with restaurants. They're also basically the landlord for a bunch of other buildings on 53rd Street, making them look nicer and finding people to move in.
Wow, so they're not just building new stuff, they're taking care of what's already there. That's cool. But we've talked about how these changes can sometimes have downsides, like pushing out the people who already live there. Did the University of Chicago think about that?
They did. They really tried to get a mix of businesses, both the big names and local ones, just starting out. They even gave some businesses free space for a little while, like pop-up shops, to see if they could make it.
Pop-up shops are a fun way to try new things. It sounds like they wanted everyone to benefit, not just big companies.
Yeah, and they knew the area's history. Hyde Park, Woodlawn, they'd been through this before. Back in the 50s and 60s, they had these urban renewal projects that ended up displacing a lot of people and causing a lot of harm.
Yeah, those urban renewal projects often made things worse, not better.
Exactly. So this time, the University of Chicago was very careful to include the community. They had tons of meetings, listened to what people were worried about, and tried to come up with a plan that worked for everyone.
Sounds like they learned from what happened before and tried to do better.
They did. Now, speaking of trying new things, let's talk about a university that's not just fixing up an old neighborhood, they're building a whole new campus. Cornell NYC Tech.
That's the one on Roosevelt Island, right? What a cool spot for it, the skinny island right in the middle of the East River. And it's got a really interesting history, too. Tell me more. It really is a unique spot. You mentioned its history is pretty colorful. What were they thinking putting a cutting-edge tech campus on an island once known for its prisons and hospitals?
Well, Roosevelt Island has always been full of contradictions. In the 1970s, New York City tried to turn it into this utopian new town in town with residential towers and a futuristic tram system. It had this whole planned community vibe.
A tram system. That's so cool. Did it work? Did it become this futuristic oasis?
Not quite. It remained somewhat isolated, both physically and in people's minds. But that's part of what makes it so perfect for Cornell NYC Tech. They're taking this place with a history of bold experiments and reimagining it as a hub for the future.
So they're leaning into that legacy of innovation.
Mhm.
What does the campus itself look like? Is it all sleek glass and steel like something out of a sci-fi movie?
There's definitely some of that. Their first academic building, designed by Morphosis Architects, is this super sustainable structure with a giant solar canopy. But they were also very mindful of the island's existing context.
So they didn't just plop down a spaceship and call it a day.
Not at all. They created a campus that's open and welcoming with lots of public spaces and walkways that connect to the island's existing greenway. They even preserved some of the old hospital buildings, adapting them for new uses.
It's like they're weaving the past and the future together. What about the whole tech hub aspect? Are they actually attracting businesses and creating jobs?
Absolutely. Their campus includes a co-location building where established tech companies can set up shop alongside startups and research labs. The idea is to create this dynamic ecosystem where ideas can flow freely and innovation happens organically.
It's like a petri dish for tech innovation.
Very cool. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from West Philly to Alston to 53rd Street to Roosevelt Island. What are some of the big takeaways you hope people are left with? I think the biggest one is that universities are not just ivory towers anymore. They're deeply embedded in their communities, and their actions have real-world consequences.
For better or worse, right? We've seen examples of both in this deep dive.
Exactly. And as universities face increasing pressure to justify their existence in a rapidly changing world, their role in community development is only going to become more important.
It's not just about educating students anymore. It's about being a good neighbor, a responsible citizen, and a force for positive change.
And that requires a shift in mindset. Universities can't just dictate solutions from on high. They need to listen to the communities they serve, build genuine partnerships, and be willing to compromise.
We saw that over and over again in these case studies. The most successful initiatives were the ones where universities acted as collaborators, not conquerors.
Absolutely. And they need to be transparent about their intentions, their limitations, and their willingness to be held accountable.
Trust is a two-way street. It's earned, not given.
Exactly. And when that trust is broken, it can be incredibly difficult to rebuild. We saw that in the case of Harvard's expansion into Alston, where their initial missteps created a lot of resentment that they're still working to overcome.
It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned plans can backfire if they're not developed in a collaborative and transparent way.
Right.
Okay, so wrapping things up here, it's clear that universities are grappling with some really complex issues as they try to balance their own institutional needs with the needs of their communities. It's a delicate dance, but as we've seen, it's one that can have a profound impact on the cities they call home. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, we'll be sure to include some links in our show notes. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions and stay curious.